Find your path with the knowledge of others and become an illuminator for those who struggle. Guide their way just by being true and being in alignment, because it comes naturally to you. On self-discovery wisdom, we share to find inspiration with lessons for millions. We hope you listen.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Sara's View of Life, right here on selfdiscoverywith.com. I'm your host, Sara Troy, and this is my second decade. Having spoke to someone a little while ago talking about being 71, she said, well, that's 7 decades. And when you look at it as decades, 7 times 10, it kind of changes the number altogether. So although I wrote my own book a few years ago, Sara's Self-Discovery to Soul Living, Spiritual Reflections and Stories on a Journey to the Heart of Soul Loving, just a little view of my life, I decided to kind of break down into the decades. So last week I did my first decade from 0 to 10, and this week is from 10 to 20, where quite a lot of significance happened. I turned 10, my dad is still alive, and we are living in the beautiful home at Westnor, lovely horseshoe driveway, road lawn, 1930s house, a big garden at the back, at the front, big area where our gardener used to grow potatoes and tomatoes and all sorts of things for us. Behind a field that is huge. I don't know if there's houses there now, but that entire street was filled with beautiful homes. And it was in a little city called Louth in Lincolnshire in England. And I was at boarding school at that time, so I was home for half term, end of term, holidays. But it was a lovely house. But everything changed when I turned 11. My dad had his, I think, 3rd or 4th heart attack, having had his first heart attack at 40. And this was a serious one. And I remember I was home for Easter. And I remember my dad wearing a polo neck, which was kind of something unusual for him. It was the 60s, and the polo neck for the men, kind of very danger man, a man from uncle, etc. And he looked very handsome in it. And he started talking about taking my mum to Paris. She'd always wanted to go, and he talked about taking her. And a couple of days later, he was dead. I was 11. My room was at the back. And I remember my brother and my mother coming in. My mother saying something to my brother about opening the curtains. And my mother saying something, I want you to be calm, but your father has died. And I remember the first feeling I felt was a sense of relief. I loved my father, but the relief came from a place of, I knew that he couldn't cope with his illness. He'd become very bitter, very angry, very much charging towards death. Now, let's not forget, he was a squadron leader, a fighter pilot in the war. He was a yachtsman, a racing car driver. And to be told that there were these restraints and that death was coming to get him, he knew his enemy back then. He knew the risks he was taking behind a racing car and yachting. But this was different. This was a disease that was coming to take him away, and he was angry about it. So my first thought was, he's finally at peace. And that's the spiritual side of me, knowing death is just a crossover back into the realm. But I felt guilty about that, and I forced myself to cry, and the crying kind of was rather hysterical. And they left me to it to get dressed, and I had to pass my father's room to go and join them where they all were. And I opened up the door and I said goodbye to my father. I love you and goodbye. And I went into the room where my mum was, and now my uncle was there, and I think the lawyer, can't remember who else was there. And I went up to my mother and I said, God took the one who was the weakest and left the one who was the strongest. Where that came from, I don't know. This is always the things that have happened to me in my life, that things that I need to say when I need to say them are there. And I remember my uncle, who was 11 years older than my father, not a very nice man, certainly not kind, extremely mean, very bitter, always jealous of my father, because my father was the gregarious one, the fighter pilot, the man who, he was living with a German countess when the war broke out, who was much older than him, had to be got out of Germany. And my uncle was just a stoic, stodge of a man with really not much imagination and not much there. And so he was very jealous of my father. So obviously my father owned the company with him. It was a family business, import and exporting of timber. And we used to get eggs and gas from there. I remember him gleefully saying to my mother, "And I've cut off the eggs and I've cut off the gas." And nasty, just a nasty man. And I remember shortly after that, the lawyer coming to read the will or getting my mother to sign something. We had a dog called Candy, Border Collie, and she used to go to work with Dad every day. And she just mourned my father, won't go into his room where he died, and just was beside herself. And I remember being in the room with the lawyer and my mum, and he wanted her to sign something. And the will was atrocious. They had played on my father's insecurities. My mother was very beautiful. Oh, she's going to leave the children. She's going to go run off for someone and just take the money. And they chiseled away at that insecurity. And my father didn't even put my mother in the will. And all of a sudden, the lawyer and the accountant bought a new summer home and a new boat, right? And we seemed to be left with very, very, very little. And yes, my mother knew this. She'd been screwed over. Apparently, just before he died, he apologized to her. "I've done a terrible thing. I'm sorry." Too late. It was done. I remember the lawyer reaching over for her to sign something, and the dog, Candy, coming up and putting her mouth over the wrist, the hand of the lawyer, and just staring at him as border collies can. And my mother said, "It's all right, Candy. Not this time." And looking at the lawyer, who was petrified. And lawyer and Candy reluctantly let go of the lawyer's hand. And my mother signed. She was very proud. There'd be nothing about fighting back. She was too proud for that. And hurt beyond hurt. So I went back to boarding school. I got teased horribly at boarding school, which I think I covered in the last show, but I'll just do a little more covering here. I was an asthmatic, so always very ill and a lot of things I couldn't do. And also, my dad had died and some kids didn't believe it. And I remember one day in prayers, because we always do prayers every morning before we went to class, and the headmistress keeping me out, saying, "No, I'd like you to go sit over here, dear, and wait here." And apparently she said to everybody in the class that indeed my father had died and that she would not tolerate this bullying and or this unkindness. But it had been an incident where 3 kids, and I can't even tell you who they are today, but 3 girls, taking me by my hair out into the garden where they had dug a hole to bury me like a weed because there's a lot of things I couldn't do that they could do, and stupidly burying me in a hole right outside the principal's office. But, nastiness is nastiness. They just find another way. I left boarding school about a year later. I was 12. And my mum and I had moved from that beautiful home into a small duplex house. Small when I sensed that it had 3 bedrooms, a living room, dining room, a little eating area, big kitchen, garage, and then I went to a different school. And I'm 12 years of age now. I'm busing to school. And again, I'm still a sickly child. So every time a cold or anything came along, I got bronchitis and I was in bed. And I would go back to school and have to catch up. It was always very difficult because being, having dyslexia and ADD, which none of that was known about in those days, and being so behind, I never could catch up. And the ridiculous thing is, again, in prayers, they would make me stand there with my feet together and my hands closed. And I had an imbalance, a lot to do with all the fevers I had. And they would have teachers standing either side of me with their feet closed and eyes closed. And they're meant to stop me from falling, but didn't. Many a time I fell. If they just let me had prayers with my eyes open and my feet apart, I would have been fine. But, it is the way it is. Anyway, that was kind of entry into teen years, right? Um, Different kind of kids because that city's kids. Before I was in a country old manor that had been converted into a school. And I'm in now another old manor that's converted into a school, but in the town. And it was, kind of the time when I'm becoming conscious of my hair and my clothing. And I remember one time we were playing tag. I slipped off a rock and I hurt my ankle, but I ignored it. And then these girls were playing getting on stilts and then walking on stilts, challenging each other of who could walk on these stilts. And I decided I could. And I'm not wearing runners or sensible shoes. I'm wearing a pair of my mother's shoes, which were patent shoes. And I get onto these stilts and I completely lose my balance and I fall right back. It's my second fall of the day. I didn't realize I'd really twisted my ankle. But anyway, when I fell back landing on a tree knob, of the root on the base of my spine. And I'm still jumping up. I'm all right, until I got home. And then we discovered everything that had gone on. So my mum took a cruise and she went to South Africa and fell in love with it and decided to come back, and we're moving to South Africa. So we go through all the medical thing that we're meant to do. We go through everything else. And there I am now, 14, and we're moving to South Africa. I had been an incredibly shy girl. I had a friend at school. On Saturdays, we would go to the movies. There'd be double features there, right? And I remember one time we're watching a double feature and we've both got long curly hair. And there's a bunch of boys behind us and they're trying to get our attention. We're ignoring them. We're 13. And we're just busy kind of, not paying attention to the boys. So at the end of the thing, they were all laughing and sniggering. We didn't know why. Went into the bathroom and they'd taken the caramel popcorn, licked it and thrown it at our hair. And our hair was covered with caramel popcorn, which was really hard to get out once it was dry. We were mortified. But we used to do that on Saturday afternoons, go and do a feature. And there was a store there called Lawson's, a department store, and they had great fish and chips and wonderful Applebee's ice cream. We may go there for lunch and then a movie, and that was kind of a thing that we did. But I was too shy to kind of mix with more than one or two people. Even at parties, I'd hold back. I always had friends that were just singular, and I don't know what it is about me and crowds. Maybe, I don't know. I just felt so timid and scared. So when this very shy girl got on this boat to go to South Africa, 3-week trip to sail to South Africa, of which, by the way, they forgot to put our clothing on the boat. So we're in winter clothing with just, sleepover stuff where we're at the hotel from the night before. And we're going in to summer over in South Africa. So that wasn't much fun. But anyway, even on the boat, my mum had made friends. I'm seeing a different side of her. She'd been pearls and tweed, very restricted. In England, once my dad died, it was take up good works, no longer invited to double parties. And just, a beautiful woman in her 40s that was kind of lost. Not that, yes, she missed my dad, but it was more lost of who is she now. And she did a great deal of theatre. She did it before my dad died, and a TV show had been written for her. and she would have been on TV, a part in this very popular TV show at the time. And my father wouldn't let her do it, told her if she went and did it, there'd be doors locked and you wouldn't see the kids again. She opened up a dress store called Sara Troy. Yes, the name I take now. My sister was called Jane. She wanted to call her Sarah Jane. Apparently, there was something against it, so called it Sara Troy. And when I started podcasting, I decided I didn't want to do it under my old married name because I'm no longer married. And I wanted to change it. And a numerology, the 8, but also honoring of my mum, Sara Troy, the dress store that she loved. And she loved the store. She would go off buying clothes for it, leading trend. People from all over the county would go to her because she had a forward eye, knew how to dress people. And it was wonderful. And then one day, just before my dad died, he said, I've sold the bugger, and took it away from her. And, in those days, women didn't have much name on things. It was always the men. And he had gone and sold it for nothing to somebody else. And my mum was mortified. She would have had that after he had gone. And so there was nothing left for her there. And of course, she went to South Africa, and then we packed up and went over there. We arrived, immediately had to go and get another wardrobe, a very different world, crickets sounding everywhere. It's April, April the 2nd. So a lot of things happened to me in April. My dad died in April. I married in April. My dog Candy was born in April. We moved to South Africa April. I started my podcasting in April. So April's always been a significant month. So we arrived April 2nd and put up in this hotel, and it was a very funny hotel. Everything was so different to England because, of course, they're geared towards the heat. We moved to this hotel in Clifton. They had a kind of annex across it, like a suite. We were there for a month before my mum found a house in a place called Newlands, lots of beautiful trees, and it was an old cottage called Stirling. It was called Stirling Cottage, and it was on Moss Street. Stirling Moss was a famous racing car driver, and it was a cute cottage. And some months later, my brother joined me. And, my brother had made a mistake back in England and had to kind of pay for that for a while. And then as a young man, he came over. Unfortunately, very early on, he got viral meningitis and nearly died. But I am now 15. I'm at school and Rustenburg at Rutenburg's. And my brother comes, and I introduce him to a guy that's come from England who was starting mobile discotheque. And so my brother and he did this mobile discotheque called Piggies, and I became the go-go dancer, first one in South Africa. So there I am at 15, go-go dancing, getting paid to dance, going to parties. I absolutely loved it. And at 16, I met a young man, and he and I started another podcast. Somebody had all the equipment, and we did all the podcasting and the DJing. And in those days, big, huge turntables, and the speakers were like coffins, and we'd have crates of records. And so, setting it all up at the end of the night when you're tired, setting it all down and carting it all back to back to the car. But it was great because we're playing at parties, either corporate parties or wedding or Malaysian weddings, or just parties, pool parties. We played everywhere and we played everything. And to kind of set the mood for the evening through the records and then the dancing, it was just so much fun. And so I was a DJ, I was a dancer. It was a lot of fun back then. And it was before, dancing got seedy and women in cages. It was just fun dancing. Even taught the go-go dancing to people because they were breaking away from the old traditional dance. And, I'm 15 and 16. It was wonderful. I left school at 16 because it just didn't. I was just too far behind. I was too different a person. It's just, my mum went to England as she did every year to see my sister and the grandchildren. And I stayed behind. And my brother looked after me somewhat. And I just remember I turned 16 and I just didn't go back to school. And I started working in a place called Jantique, an artist who would take old ice boxes and old junk and turn it into art. And she had no idea how to sell. And so I sold for her, did very, very well. And I remember my old headmistress coming in one day and I was wearing the school tunic with a psychedelic blouse underneath it. And she said, well, I'm not sure that's appropriate. But she said to me, why did you leave school, Sarah? And I said, well, I'm too far behind. I will never catch up. And I'm just going to have to make my way in the world. And she said, yes, I know you're different. And I know that school and the way that it's taught was not for you. But I see so much potential in you, so don't give up on education. And the world became my educator. I remember there was a girl at school that I was a little jealous of, teacher's favorite, could recite anything from a book. And you ask her, page this, page that, she knew it. And I just found difficulty in kind of reading like that. When I read, I got lost in a book. And it wasn't about turn to page such and such, read just than what. I did better through conversation. I did better through allowing myself to become part of the story and then see how it felt, because it was always about feelings. My art teacher always had me do art in bizarre ways because she said that's the way my mind worked. I mean, my music teacher, very often we didn't do music, we got into long conversations, and that's where kind of that knowingness would come out. And I remember one day there was a teacher teaching vocational guidance, and she had gone from school to teaching school, back into school, no experience of life whatsoever. And she made a statement, and I said, I'm sorry, miss, but I experienced that 2 days ago, and it didn't happen like that. Do not contradict me, she said. You go to the principal's office. And she sent me to the principal's office. And later on, she came along, and the principal asked what the problem was. And I said, I'd actually gone through this experience, and it didn't happen the way she said. And she asked the teacher, well, why did you not honor her experience? She said, because I'm the teacher and what I say is right. And the principal turned to me and said, you do not have to be in her class anymore. You can go and do a different class while she's teaching. And I wasn't back in her class anymore. And I'm not quite sure what was said to the teacher, but it wasn't the kind of teaching that I know this principal wanted in that school. So 16, I have left school. And I remember one time for a fundraiser in school, I got my mother to read cards. We're both gypsy readers. And for this fete that we were making, so there was a lineup, like everybody gone home, there's still a lineup for my mother and I to read people's fortunes. And I remember one of the classmates coming in, she was older than I. And I read her cards and I kept reading her cards, and no picture cards, no significant, all low number cards. And I'd have her do it again and again. And I said, I'm sorry, love, it's just not with you today. And I remember talking to my mum about it afterwards. And basically, she was dead within a week. Like there was no future for her. And I have read people where I know they're going to die, and it's a very uncomfortable thing. And, what I've said to other people who are older is, you're going to lose a loved one, make sure that you have closure before you do. And that closure is more for the other end rather than this end. But yes, it's uncomfortable when you read those type of things. And I don't read anymore, but I did for a very, very, very long time. So anyway, I have left school. I'm working in Jantique. I'm still doing the discoing with my boyfriend Grant. And after a couple of years, we break up. I always went for kind of very forceful men. I don't know why. Anyway, I'm working in boutiques. I remember working in one boutique, and a woman came along and she was spending a lot of money, and she wanted to try on this Angora trouser suits with pants and sweater. And I said to her, I don't want to sell it to you. I want you to go away and think about it. Come back tomorrow if you want to try it on again. But I want you to, she'd already bought a lot and she loved the feel of it, but it didn't do anything for her body. nothing at all. The next day I come into work, to my um, manager, because it was a boutique within a department store, fired me and said, "This is your last day." And I go, "Why?" "Because you wouldn't sell her that Angora suit." And I said, "Because she wouldn't have looked good in it. It doesn't matter. It's a sale." Anyway, the woman came in and she said, "I want to tell you thank you. Thank you for not selling it to me. Um, I fully agree with what you said. And I just would have bought it and never worn it." And I said, "Well, today is my last day." And she says, "Is that because of this?" And I was open and honest, yes. So she went to management. Management didn't like me because I was not a conformist. I always did things in a different way. But anyway, she went to him and complained that the head of management then came and fired my manager and told me I could take her place. And I said, "I don't want to take her place. I'm 16. I do not want to manage the place. I just want to be honest with the customer." Anyway, I eventually left that job and went on to other jobs. I worked in restaurants, did many, many restaurants. What I liked about the restaurants I worked in, they were small and intimate. Like I may have a busboy, but otherwise you did everything. You were the only person there. But it gave you a chance to meet the regulars and know the people, know their favorites. And I've always preferred that kind of restaurant to dine in, but also to work in. And I've worked in many restaurants. And um, I was dating various other people. People would fall in love with me for my spirit, just the way I see the world, the spirit, the way I see the world. And then the moment that they had me would try and conform and change me and make me different. And I can't be different. And so it always end up being a conflict. Anyway, I worked in dress stores and restaurants. I worked all over the place. Then I went into mobile oil as a rep. At this point, I have a boyfriend. I'm going to back up a little bit. I lived in Cape Town, most beautiful place, exquisite, and we moved around a great deal. I moved out on my own at 16 and lived, we kind of people shared a house. I moved back at 19 because at 15 I had weeping eczema. And going back to my first decade, I developed eczema and asthma when the Asian flu went around to England and it was very aggressive. I've never outgrown the asthma. I have outgrown the eczema except for this one finger, which still wants to have it. But I would get this weeping eczema where the clothes would stick with me. You would touch me, it'd be like sticking to molasses, and the heat of my body could be felt throughout the room. Water on it was like acid, and it was very painful. And I had that at 15, and it took quite some months to get out of it. And I had it again at 19. So at 19, I moved back home because it was very hard to work. I was in a lot of agony, even though I did do some jobs, but I just couldn't follow through on them. And it took a good 9 months. It is like I have fibromyalgia today and I've had for 30 years, but I actually think that the weeping eczema was kind of a part of that because it is about the heightened sensitivity in the body and the nerve endings and your high alert being at screaming pitch. And like this eczema has been brought out about that through kind of stress and anxiety and heightened. And it took me a good 9 months to come out of that. Touch wood, I've never been down that road again. But I've had other nervous issues, which is all to do with that hypersensitivity, which transformed into fibromyalgia later. So anyway, I moved back home, and then I started to work again, and then I moved to Johannesburg for a short while, and I moved there when I was 17, actually, so before the 19. And I worked there for a while. I did a bit of modeling, I did dancing. And I remember one night dancing at the club, and then I'm going to a party with a group of people, and this guy's giving me a lift. And I have this bag, which was the change of clothes, etc. And he said, "Oh, I'll leave the bag in the car, I'll get it later." And he takes me up to this apartment, throws me in and closes the door. And there is this older man. What the heck is going on here? And this older man kind of comes and approaches me, and I realize I'm the only one there. And I said, absolutely no way. And I came out of that door and I'm running after the guy because in that bag is also my house keys and everything else. And he's gone. And it's very, very late at night. And there is a restaurant that was open till 3 in the morning. And I walked in there and there's a guy called Beefy. He was 300 pounds. And everybody was intimidated about him, but he had a heart of gold. And there was another young guy working there who was actually training to become a doctor and was working to put himself through medical school. And I was crying and I told him what happened. And he took me off to the police. And because obviously I was being set up. And I couldn't go home because I didn't have keys. We went to the police. The guy didn't even look up. And yeah, totally disinterested. And then I said something short to him, and he looked up, you want to go into the jail for the night? And I thought, thank you for your sympathy, right? The way he treated me was horrible. Anyway, Beefy took me back, and I stayed at the young medical doctor's place. He studied through the rest of the night. I slept. And the next day I went home and got my landlord to let me in. Anyway, one night, they gave me a different set of keys, and one night I'm dancing. And Beefy became my protector. Everybody knew that Beefy was my protector. Don't mess with her. Leave her alone. And then I hear one day I got my bag back, and I hear the guy that took the bag and took me to the other house has a very severely broken leg. So I hope he learned a lesson from that. But it was a complete setup that I walked blindly into thinking I was going to a party. I believed too much in honesty and kind of didn't think that people were such cads as they were, but it is the way it was. I also had this great gay friend, and I remember he said, we're all gay here. And I said, I'm gay too, because I took it in the context of being happy, because that's where the word comes from, gay, to be joyful, to be happy. And I hadn't heard it being associated, didn't even know what homosexuality was. I know that I'd been accosted by 3 lesbians on a train, but it just still kind of wasn't kind of norm. Anyway, he was a shop dresser and a makeup artist. And Cabaret had come out, the movie. And so we were all dressed, he thinned my eyebrows out. We were all dressed like Cabaret and lots of Cabaret type parties. And I remember going to a club with him once, a gay club, where everybody's dancing. And we were dancing together. He was trying to make his boyfriend jealous. And we were told to leave because we're BMs. And I said, what's a BM? A baby maker. And but even though women were there, and sometimes wives of the husbands were there. Why, I don't know, but it was quite sad to see. But he and I kind of hang out for a long time. He was a lot of fun until one day we were all having lunch and he's having a fight with his gay lover. And it got nasty and bitchy and everything else. And I just couldn't take it anymore. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. And that was that. I had several boyfriends and lovers myself. The 70s was all about free love and sexual expression. And I was a highly sensual woman that men took as sexuality. The sensual was the love of life and tuned with life and just very passionate about life. And men used that as an excuse for sexuality. And so, yes, a lot of free love at that time. I went back from Johannesburg back to Cape Town and stayed there for a while longer. And my mum had come up, excuse me. And she had come up to live there for a while and just took a small suite. And we hung out a lot and she worked there for a while. But I was having a problem. The Yugoslavian mafia were very, very big in Johannesburg, especially in Hillbrow. And, I remember somebody sitting, because we ate a lot outside. And this guy sitting at a table outside this restaurant, and this guy told him to move. And he said, no. I'm eating. And they picked him up and threw him down concrete stairs. They would throw people into windows. I mean, the police were scared of them because they would target their families. And so it was so hard for the police to actually get any policing done. And I was being stalked by a younger Yugoslavian guy who wouldn't let me go. And I had moved. And little did I know that he had moved right next door to me. And we went to the police and we were trying to talk to the police about this. And he said, look, I had a new recruit the other day and I gave him a letter to post and he posted it in a phone booth. I am having such a hard time getting policing. There isn't much that I could do. Anyway, we had gone there for car accidents and things, and he ended up being a very nice gentleman. But he was just having such a hard time getting any policing done because the Yugoslavian mafia were, just targeting the police and their families and just really being unruly. Anyway, we found out that the uncle of this young guy also lived in the complex, and my mother and I knocked on the door. We've come here to complain about your nephew and, the mafia. So we walked in. And the uncle had us sit down and we're pointing out that he will not leave me alone, that he's following me everywhere. He's even moved next door. And the guy just looked, we were both very, very courageous. And that, for mum for standing up for me and for me facing it. And he said, don't worry, he'll never bother you again. And ever you're in trouble, you come knocking at my door. So I had more protection again. A lot of things happened in Johannesburg, and I had gone back to the Cape for a week with my sister, and I'd gone to a party using my mum's car, and it was right out on a farm. We were drinking wine all day, and it was time to leave. And it's the guy is leading me out to get back to the main highway because it's complex. And I had a sunroof open, and I had these glasses that would change, from sunglasses to light. But it was dusk and the glasses weren't changing quick enough, so I took them off. And I'm waving through the sunroof for him to slow down because he's going too fast. And we're hitting this corner, which is where the tractors come in and out of this field. And it's just kind of gravelly mud everywhere. And I skid. And the funny thing is as I'm skidding, I'm seeing a family in a white car coming towards me, and I know there's 4 people in it, mum, dad, and 2 kids. If your mind just takes a photo shot like that. And I turn because I'm skidding on this gravel on the road. And I turn so I don't hit them, because I would have. And then I remember just thinking, oh, thank God I didn't roll the car. And the roof of the car is on my shoulders. I don't recall rolling. But had I been wearing a seatbelt at that time, the roof would have cut my head in half. As I hadn't, I had been swung to one side and come back, and then the roof was about here by my ears. And I'd wrecked my mum's car. And it was a Ford Capri. First time in her life she'd had a sports car. She loved this car. But instead of calling an ambulance, or anything, the guy took me out of the car and took me back to the farm. My mum's a nurse, he said. Well, his mum was an alcoholic. What did she do? She gave me wine or something else to drink. I am out of it. The police come and look at me and I am just out of it. I should have had medical attention. The next day, he takes me home, but he wants to drop me at the end of the road, not take me right up to where I was staying with my mum. And I demanded that he did. And when I got out of the car, of course, my mum had gone and seen the car at this point. It had been towed. All they did was phoned my mum and said, she's alive. We'll bring her back tomorrow. Put the phone down. So she didn't even know what was going on. Saw the car, found it amazing that I was alive. And anyway, she was very upset that she'd lost the car. I don't blame her. And I walked into the house. I'm in a lot of agony. But over the next week, all the bruising came out. And at the end of the week, she was having a party before we and my sister and I were going back to Johannesburg, because I was living there at the time. And I looked like the back end of a baboon. My face is purple and yellow and swollen, my spine and the base of my spine and my buttocks and my legs, because I'd been thrown around. I had just bruising everywhere. And I remember having to go into town or go to the hospital, and I'm hitching a ride back because there really wasn't much transportation at that time, and that was in the week. And this doctor stopped and picked me up, and he looked at me and he said, "What happened?" And I told him. And he said, "Have you driven yet?" And I said, "No." And he stopped the car and he said, "You're driving." I said, "Oh, but," and he said, "No, you're driving." And he said, "If you don't get behind the wheel now, you might never get behind the wheel." And he made me drive home. And then he actually explained to my mother she has to drive, otherwise she will never find her confidence again. Anyway, I think it's kind of the day or two later, when my sister and I are meant to go back to Johannesburg, we get up in the morning, there's a note from my sister, "I've gone." Drove back to Johannesburg without me. And it's like, what? My sister, very funny person, she does do things like that. And it's, well, how am I going to get back now? Anyway, there was an ad in the paper of an elderly couple looking for someone to drive them in a Volkswagen. So I took the ad and I drove this elderly couple all the way back. Now, we had to stop for a night because at that time there was the oil shortage and gas stations were closed at 6. So we had to stop and we stayed over in a hotel. And the next day I'm driving them back. And as I'm driving into the driveway, I told them about the accident. "We never would have known, dear. You drove us beautifully. Thank you." And then my sister had to come and pick me up from there. But another time coming from Cape Town back to Johannesburg, my mum had somebody who was an Audi dealership guy, and there was a car he wanted to deliver to Johannesburg. So I drove this car back. Again, had to stop overnight because if you drove any further, there were no gas stations. And when we're talking distance, we're talking huge distances between towns and gas stations. So if you broke down in the middle somewhere, you were out in the bundu. And anyway, I stopped at this hotel and there was a movie being made there. And I met this young man called Dan, who was the sound engineer. And stay up most of the night talking, which I shouldn't have done. The next day I'm driving and I'm exhausted. And I pick up this army guy. And I'd taken a pill, which somebody said will keep me awake. And I think it was like speed, but it done the adverse thing for me. Like my brain is like this, but my body completely shut down. And I said to the army guy, "Do you mind driving? And then I'll take it from there." And I passed out. And anyway, drop him off at the army camp and then drive the car home to my sister's where I'm staying, and then had to arrange for the car to be picked up from there. Anyway, I take a car and I drive to where Dan is meant to be living. And anyway, it ends up that we become an item and ends up that we become engaged. But ultra possessive. Didn't even want me to read a book because the attention wasn't on him. Where am I going? To the bathroom, and he would go away to do films. And I even had his director call me once with, "Whatever you do, do not leave him, because he'll commit suicide on set." And so I did leave him at one time, but pretended I was still there and waited for him to get back. And I said, "Look, you'll do what you have to do, but I cannot be held captive here anymore." Family and friends were saying, "You've become a shell of yourself, Sara," and all for the fear of this young man. And again, it wasn't physical beating, it was the controlliness, which I seemed to pick men that were controlling. And yeah, a journey I had to sort out later in life. So we did get engaged at, I was 22 at that point when we did break up. And then I moved back to Johannesburg for a while. No, we were in Johannesburg, sorry, but I moved into an apartment and I worked hard. Generally Mondays were off. I would go to the ballet and out restaurants, worked from, Tuesday to Sunday, and worked really hard, generally double shifts, lunch and dinner, played hard, and met my friend Margaret and her husband, Margaret Segas, became good friends with them. read for them that he had been offered a job back in England. I said, no, you're not going to England, you're going somewhere else, going to another country in North America. And he goes, no, no, no. Went back to England and got offered a job in Canada. So when I came to Canada, I came to stay with them before I went out on my own. So um, it was a peculiar life in Johannesburg, and I became very jaded. And I became very much a person that kind of, I saw so much violence, shootings, stabbings, rapes, murders. It was just a hodgepodge of it. There were some of the greatest restaurants you could ever eat at in Johannesburg and Hillbrow, really cosmopolitan, and it could be a wonderful, vibrant life. But there was that violent side of it that was getting more and more. I remember one New Year's, we all got out into Hillborough, into the streets to wish each other Happy New Year. I'm wearing these white clogs and we're all, celebrating. Black, white, everybody. Out come the police with the badges and start hitting everyone because black and white are mixed together. And I remember my clogs breaking in half as we're running off. Also in the restaurants, we would have busboys that were people of color, and all of a sudden they'd go missing and they were arrested, and you never hear from them again. No idea where they went. And it was just so much of that apartheid stuff. And eventually the misogyny of the men, which was so big, so high, so many egos, so much entitlement, so much about, their boss and they can do anything they want to women. It was just so much. I couldn't take it anymore. And the apartheid, the way everybody was being treated. For me, it's like we're all human beings. Doesn't matter what casing we come in. So I decided to leave. And then I went to New York to have a week with my brother, which was a wonderful experience. The Pirates of the Penzance with Linda Ronstadt and Calvin Klein was being shown in the park. And we went to see the dress rehearsal, the one where the press come the night before opening, and got second row watching the whole performance. Was fantastic. And then there was Pat Benatar's concert that we didn't go into, but we sat on a rock and listened to. And, we went to the movies, we walked everywhere. And it was just a wonderful week with my brother. And then I came to Canada, to Vancouver, stayed with my friends in North Man, worked at a restaurant as a hostess. And 5.5 months in, a man walks in, Chinese man, who knows the owner. And this is funny, French cuisine restaurant owned by Chinese, Japanese chef. And this gentleman walks in, I'm hostess, so I get to talk to people. The next day he phones to ask me out. I have on the other line another man who is just left his wife. And I thought, do I want that? And I went out with this other guy that turned out later to be my husband, who was at the time separated from his wife in the process of a divorce. And we married, but actually I didn't want to marry. We had my daughter Tabitha, and he had a pizza restaurant, so I worked with him. And before we had my daughter Tabitha, I'm working with him at the restaurant, and I had to extend my visa. And we went into the visa area, and I know somebody else had done it this way, applied for it while living in as long as he had sponsorship. So I go up to the counter to extend it because I had a year visa, so I'm now extending it. And I wanted to get my equivalent to green card, my landed immigrancy. And the guy is British that lived in South Africa that's now here in Vancouver. And we're chatting away, everything, and no problem, you can do as long as you've got a sponsor, blah, 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 blah. Who's your sponsor? I go, my boyfriend. What's he owns his own restaurant, fine. Is he here? Yes. Can he come over? He walked over, the guy took one look at him, and he was Chinese, right? My boyfriend was Chinese. Stamped my passport, you've got 10 days to leave the country, and walked away. What does that say? So anyway, I have now got to leave the country. I have a ticket that can take me out of Seattle. Why we went that way, I don't know. I go back to England and have to go to the consulate to try and get a visa to come back. And so I was coming back as my friend's nanny. And that did get me back in. But on the 10th day, they walked into the restaurant and tried to arrest a girl that had the same hairstyle as me. She was born and bred in Vancouver, right? That's how far this guy went. Clearly, he did not like Chinese people. So anyway, we ran the restaurant together. I was a nanny for my friend for a while. I am um, getting my work visa extended while I'm pregnant. And for me, it wasn't, I didn't want to marry. You're with me because you want to be with me. We will have children because we want to have children. This is a choice and not a demand. But, this was the era of, your child would be a bastard, and this and that. And also marrying meant that I could get my papers and we weren't going to be at risk of me being deported. And so we married when my daughter was 3 months old, or 4 months old. And kind of things changed after that, right? And we later on had my son. And we had a tumultuous relationship right from the word go. It was a push and pull and just at each other's throats. But then he could be as charming as anything. And I am pregnant with my son, about to deliver. And I get a phone call. My husband then, we sold the restaurant when I was pregnant with my son. And he's in real estate. And I get a phone call from a woman asking about him. And I think maybe it's to do with the real estate. And then she starts asking all these questions. And I go, oh, sorry, could I ask what's your relationship with Tony? And she said, well, I'm his girlfriend. I go, oh, really? How long? And she said, who are you? Oh, I'm his wife, about to give birth to his second child. And she was flabbergasted, never knew, of course, so she promised never to see him again. He came home, and he always knew he was in trouble when I was silent. I would sit there absolutely quiet. Absolutely quiet. Then you go, what's wrong? What's wrong? Oh, your girlfriend called. Oh, by the way, she won't be seeing you again. Oh, what do you mean, my girlfriend? Um, well, she called you, looking for you. Uh, oh, there's another Tony that works at the same company. It must have been his girlfriend. They gave her the wrong number. And I thought, really? Anyway, a couple of days later, I had my son. Dreadful, dreadful delivery. All of my births were very, very hard and very bad. And this one was exceedingly bad because they did me an epidural and my only half of my body had frozen. I'd gone into a coma before I'd gone into full labor. The labor is awful. He was born just traumatized completely, rushed off to the incubator. And then I had a woman who decided I was evil because I was a spiritual woman and not of her Methodist religion, and left me lying in the cold bed. Whereas before, I had a midwife nurse who had me wrapped up warm, made sure that I was all clean and comfortable, gave me something to eat. She'd been the one to virtually push the baby out. And, this one was a horrific delivery. And anyway, we went on to have more children. But that actually, I've gone off topic because he didn't come until in my 20s. So I need to go back to the 10 and 20 because I've gone off topic there. But I came here when I was 24, but up until the age of 20, I also had traveled a great deal. So I had traveled and I went on my own. I'd gone back to England on my own a few times at 17 and 18. And then at 20, I went and started traveling. And I'll cover more of that in my 20 to 30. And I'm sorry going off into my marriage because that was in my mid 20s. But it was the tumultuousness of losing my father. And it was the, going to South Africa, this shy girl. My mum finding herself suddenly, she's on the back of a motorbike wearing a wig. She's in theater. She's having parties, going to parties. She came alive suddenly. She's Joanna, no longer Bob's wife. And she is just living the exuberant life, men falling in love with her. But she was always trepidatious of men. And one man she absolutely loved, unfortunately, was killed by a drunk driver who drove right into him. And there was another gentleman called Carl Schmidt, and he was an architect, and he had a patch over one eye. And of course, he was very handsome. It was all the era of James Bond and Danger Man and everything else. And so, both of us were and he was a hoot. Um, but, he was one of those people you could just drool over. But we went to a lot of parties and we hosted a lot of parties together. And we did a lot together. More traveling of that came in my 20s, but, hosting parties, cooking together, going out together. We did a lot of that. So my 20s were very much about that self-discovery of who is Sara. Unfortunately, my first experience with sex was not good. It was a date rape, which sends you down the path of, did send me down the path of seeking someone to love me and thinking sex was love. And that was a path that was very detrimental for me. But again, it was that era of free sex and men, I won't love you unless, just being caught up in that, which wasn't very good. But most certainly a fast growing up, working, my spirituality, doing a lot of that, doing a lot of readings, being unbelievably naive over certain things, and being wise beyond my years and others. So it was a very tumultuous time. Very happy times in there, like the barbecues and the parties, the discoing. Love doing that, love setting on the record and setting the stage for people to dance and come together and have fun. Loved all of that. Loved the modeling side of it. It was always fun. I did seasonal modeling. I did ramp modeling. A quick story on the ramp modeling. We did this ramp modeling at a hospital, raising funds for the hospital, and they put all these tables together with just a carpet on it, but they didn't tie the tables together. So as we're walking, they're getting further and further apart, and so yeah, at one point, whoop, down we went between the tables. But there was a lot of fun things like that. Another one we did with these beautiful clothing, very see-through, and we're modeling it in a discotheque, and the guy said, turn on the lights so we can see the clothing. And we're getting all this applause. We thought the clothing is looking lovely, and later to find out that when we go onto the lights, the clothing disappears and all you see is body. But anyway, the fashion industry was really interesting. I loved working in fashion. I loved working in restaurants. I love working with people. I love anything that's kind of creative. And, happy tummies, which my son's gone into restaurant business, dressing people to make themselves feel good. And, the modeling was one that was just, fun to wear the latest clothes. And I loved fashion. I loved it. And, I was earning $100 a week, 40 for a month. 40 for my rent. My car would take $1 a week for gas, food, clothing, everything had to come out of that. Yet made it work. So it was a real huge growth time for me. I could only get my car license at 19. It was not 16 there, it was 19. I bought my first car, which was a Simca 1000, rather like a Fiat, an Italian car. And $400. It's rand, which is cheaper than dollars, but we'll go by dollars for reference. And I went for to go and get my driver's license, and I'd been waiting all day, and the nerves shook me. And as I'm reversing in between the pails, I hit the pail. Okay, 48 hours, come back, and I took my one and only lesson at 6 o'clock in the morning on the way to go and get my license. Did my license at 7, and at 7:30 had my license, and went around all day picking up hitchhikers just so I could drive all day. And loved driving, and did a lot of it. My little Simca 1000 went like a bat out of hell, was so cheap to run. And it just got me everywhere. And I loved the freedom of driving. So yes, it was 19. So 19 and 20 was a freedom year for me. But I will come back next week with the 22, 20, 230, which unfortunately carries a little bit of the marriage and that, which I've covered today. But a lot of where we went there was laid here. And it was a lot of my darkness that came then because I was such a free spirit. Going to South Africa is where I discovered my real spirit, where I could really step into that spirit. But it also was a time of, as I said, that misogyny, that never feeling truly seen or truly heard. You know, a lot of repression, people not looking at you as a beautiful soul, but as a sexual being. But then there was also a lot of happy times, like with the discotheque, with the dancing, with the modeling, with, you know, the friend parties together. So it was very yin and yang. But it was kind of the gearing up to who Sara would be. So next week will be the third decade. So thanks for listening. And don't forget, if you want to know more, you can always get it in my book, Sara's Self-Discovery to Soul Living. And you can find that on Amazon and also at the bottom of the show page. So thanks, folks. It's kind of fun going down this memory lane, looking at each decade and how profound it is. I encourage you to do the same, whether you write it or whether you video it. Do it for yourself. Let things come alive to things that you knew in the past and keep them alive. It is your journey. It is your life. It's okay to look back and revisit it. So until next time, folks, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show. There are so many more for you to listen to right here on selfdiscoverywisdom.com. Come and hear the illumination that's going to shed light on your path.
Find your path.